there is a communality to the ecosystem, and this spans across different beats, from tech to politics. You always find like journalists or media people, they band together, they move in groups, they operate in groups, and I think that's it's also a reflection of the collectivist nature of cultures around Africa.
This is Bantu, the African Creative Podcast. Hello and welcome to Bantu, the African Creative Podcast. My name is Adetunji and this is season 1 of the first time that we're trying out a project like this. I promised myself I would not script this part, and so this is me live and direct. This episode I have a really special guest. I've admired his work trying to analyze the Nigerian media industry, and I think in the conversation that we're trying to have on Bantu about the intersection between media, creativity, and brands, it's important to understand where media sits in all this and what we're doing. I have David Adeleke with me. He is a communication strategist and media analyst. He works with Echo Atlantic City as the head of communications and PR strategy. He also has a publication called Communality, where he dissects the Nigerian media industry and Africa as a whole, and he tries to glean out stories that we can all learn from. Glad to have you on the show, David.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, David. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, where did you grow up?
That is a very vast question, because I'm a product of a lot of places. I grew up in a Pentecostal home.
Yeah.
And the church my dad is a pastor, and the church he works for moved him around a lot. They still move him around a lot. I was born in Osun State. By the time I was 6 years old, I'd already left the country. Spent 2 years outside Nigeria. Came back. When we came back, they moved us to Delta State. We lived in Imo State, lived in Abia State, lived in Anambra State, lived in Enugu State. So I'm a product of different places.
Wow, you've been all over the world. So essentially, your family was like nomads.
Yeah, we are. We were nomads. In some ways, we still are.
Really? Do you still move around in recent times?
Yes, they still move them around.
Oh, I see. When you were growing up, how did being and living in all these places sort of affect your view of Nigeria?
So I've never really understood why people are tribalistic, because I've had the chance to experience so many diverse, cultures, diverse experiences, different types of people. So it never really occurred to me to be prejudicial, because there was just no reason for me to think of a certain group of people in a certain way, because I had experienced life with such a vast, with such a variety of people. So that has also informed how I approach life. So no one is too high, or no one is too low, or no one is too different. No one is too far removed from me. So I can easily adapt to whatever the situation demands of me.
So
right. That's one of the advantages of moving around a lot.
And it is a good advantage. Being and living in different places gives us a unique perspective. You're a graduate of mass communications from Covenant University. Did you always want to be a journalist even before you got into Covenant?
So I wanted to study psychology.
Really?
I wanted to study psychology because I felt it would help me understand. Because I've always been curious about human behavior. But the thing that I have always wanted to do, apart from being curious about human behavior, is tell stories. From a very young age, I've been interested in stories. I read a lot when I was young. I still try to read a lot. Before I was 10, I'd read the leopards, the bottled leopard. I'd read An African Night Entertainment. I'd read Things Fall Apart. I'd read Chicky and the River. I used to read a lot of books when I was much younger. So that kind of informed how I grew up and what I am now doing with my career. So I didn't think I would be a journalist, but I always knew I would be telling stories in one way or the other.
So this was, a natural extension from the desires that you had when you were younger. And did you try to sort of live out those dreams while you were studying mass comms of being or telling stories?
Well, yes. I started writing in 2013. No, I started writing professionally in 2013 when I opened a blog. Then blogging wasn't really, it was just starting to pick up.
Right.
So I started writing professionally in 2013, but I used to write before then. I used to try my hands at short stories, essays. I've always been good with the English language, generally. So yes.
Oh, right. So this kind of played out. And then further down the line, you leave Covenant University and you start working for Big Cabal Media. What was it like working at Big Cabal in 2015, before Zikoko, before, the prominence of social media?
So that was when Zikoko started picking up, actually, 2015. So there have been different iterations or different versions of Zikoko.
Right.
Zikoko in the beginning was based heavily on what BuzzFeed was. So lots of listicles and but one thing that has been constant is the desire to create content that goes viral, that is largely social. So in 2015, digital media was just, we were all just trying to figure it out. We still are trying to figure it out because no one has all the answers. But then there was a lot of experimentation at that time. Now people kind of know what works and what doesn't. But there was a lot more experimentation in 2015 than you would find now. So we did a lot of that. We were always trying our hands at new things. And there was, initially, because it was new, people respected the people, like the audience generally respected the people who were trying their hands at those things. So in some ways, we were mini celebrities.
Really?
We were mini celebrities. You would go to a place and people will recognize you. Oh, you're David Adeleke from Tech About. It was within a small community. It was within the tech community. But till today, I still meet people who remember me from the early days of Tech About. So there was a lot of experimentation, but there was also, this idea that people had that because it was new, there was a lot of respect and admiration for the people who were venturing into it. Not so much now because everybody has seen everybody's backside and underbelly and
that's
and
been
then they
done to
realize
death.
that you're not special just because you write for a publication. You're not that special. So that allure is gone.
They must have been the golden days, weren't it?
They were the golden days, actually.
Yeah. So now you're in corporate, what I'd like to call corporate anyway. You work for Echo Atlantic City. And in many ways, you've had a number of roles between your beginnings at Tech Cabal and Echo Atlantic. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about how you got to Echo Atlantic and what you do there?
Wow, it's a it's a long journey. So when I left Tech Cabal, I started freelancing for a little while. I was working with different platforms. I was mostly writing for a freelance platform called Scrive. Scrive was essentially trying to build an Upwork for the local market. When I stopped writing for Scribe, and I wrote a bit for Checkpoint. And then from Tech Point, I did a few things here and there. Then I moved to Ventures Africa. Ventures Africa was where my career really kicked off.
Yeah.
It was then I got into a fellowship with the Charles Cook Institute. That's how I got my media and journalism fellowship. And then while I was at Ventures Africa, I got into a workshop at Yale University. So I essentially crowdfunded, not essentially, I crowdfunded my my way to Yale.
Wow.
Through GoFundMe. I remember that year very well. Yeah, it was a crazy period. And then from Ventures Africa, I went to the US to finish up my fellowship. Then at the end of my fellowship, I wanted to stay back to go back to school and do my master's. But I got an offer to come be the editor of Business Insider Sub-Saharan Africa. So that's when I decided to come back to Nigeria in 2019. Manage the Business Insider desk for a little over 2.5 years, or about 2.5 years actually. Then I moved into corporate communications.
Was it a big jump moving from sort of media, Business Insider, news desk onto Echo Atlantic City?
So, no, it wasn't because, and this is something that I talked about in a recent interview. Journalism in Nigeria is the business side of journalism in Nigeria is starting to look a lot like content marketing. So that's number one. And number two is that content marketing is now a big part, or is becoming a big part of corporate communication. At least for the people who know what they are doing, content marketing is becoming a big part of their communication strategy. So the third thing is, when I thought about this properly, I weighed my options. I looked at what my career could be in the long term, and then I realized it's much better for me to make the switch from journalism, because the truth is there really isn't money in journalism. There's not a lot of money in it.
Right.
In media generally. Right. So I decided to now make the move to switch into communications, knowing fully well that I will still be able to do journalism on my own terms, which is what I'm now doing with Communique and what I'm doing with how we made it in Africa.
I have not heard about How We Made It in Africa.
Oh, it's a Pan-African business publication. It's really popular. It's based in SA. It's really popular in this side of the world.
What type of content do you guys publish?
I mostly write interviews. I mostly do interviews, but How We Made It in Africa generally is focused on business insights. So it's subscription based. So the publication is heavy on insights.
Right. Be sure to leave a link in the show notes just for everybody who would be listening in at whatever point. Okay. This is a great segue into Communique, because a big part of what you are doing after being at Echo Atlantic for a bit of time is Communique. And I'd like you to tell me a bit about how you started Communique.
So while I was editor of Business Insider, I was very, very, very particular. I was very particular about the business side of media. So I used to talk a lot with my editor-in-chief about the monetization strategy, the business models around digital media. How do we figure out how to expand our offerings? So when I left Business Insider, after a year, I decided to start Communique to explore that business, the business of media in Nigeria. It's partly inspired by what Ben Thompson does with Strategist and what Jason Njoku does with his blog. Jason Njoku is the CEO and founder of Iroko, and he blogs a lot about his experience running a consumer internet business. Media and the creative industry generally, or creative businesses, advertising, PR, marketing, do a very good job of selling other industries, of telling stories of other industries, but they're not great at telling their own stories. So like you rightly mentioned, agencies aren't often in the news. And even if they are in the news, it's within a very, very tiny niche. PR agencies are not often in the news, or people don't really people don't really have these conversations on a larger scale. So what Communality is doing is filling that gap for telling the stories within the media and creative business, and also analyzing those places.
This is good. This is good. I think it's really important. There isn't enough sort of non-entertainment type of content about the things that media has become.
Okay.
How did the media in Africa or the media in Nigeria get to this point where the business of it is becoming unviable and essentially revenues are falling everywhere?
So it's a global problem all around the world. The media industry was built largely on advertising, right?
Mm-hmm.
Publishers, broadcasters, they were the gatekeepers to people's attention. So if a business wanted to get in front of an audience, they had to go through the only media through which they can communicate with the audience. So that was TV, that was print, right? Radio, and all these other channels.
Right.
But with the advent of the internet, social media, blogs, and all these other platforms, that power became splintered, right? So there was no longer the power was no longer concentrated in the hands of the traditional media. The digital media platforms, aggregators, publishers, they too had a share of the power. And because these people are better at tracking what people are doing, they're better at giving more accurate, to a large extent, they're better at giving accurate results, accurate feedback in real time of what people want, where people are visiting, how many people are visiting a particular place. So it only makes sense speaking globally now, for advertisers to put their money in those places. But in Nigeria, what you find is that traditional media still commands the bulk of advertising spend. Again, advertising is the primary way that media companies make money. But now, because all these other Facebook, Google, all these other platforms are attracting more and more advertising spend, people are spending less on traditional. But even at that, people are still spending more on traditional in Nigeria. So
Right.
it's more expensive to advertise on channels than it is to advertise in business day, than it is to advertise in someone's YouTube program, or to advertise on a digital news platform. When in reality, those digital platforms probably have better numbers than channels, right? They have better numbers than business day. But because of the perception that people still have about legacy media, people spend more on traditional. And another thing is, and this is my theory, because of the way people consume content, and this is something that I'm designing a research around, but because of the way people consume content, people are more likely to consume content on traditional media when they are relaxed, right? And they are more likely to be impacted by the content that they are consuming on those traditional media channels.
Right.
So those platforms still attract more in terms of advertising spend than the digital platforms. Now, this is just my theory or my hypothesis. It may or may not be correct, but I'm willing to bet that is the case.
Wow. This is powerful insights. And I would put 2 cents on your theory and I'd say that you'd be right. In fact, I'd put 5,000 on that.
I think so. I think so. And I think so because let me give you an example.
Go ahead.
The most popular and the most engaging content types, or the content packages in Nigeria, are Big Brother, and the English Premier League. Right?
Yeah.
Where do people consume them?
On TV.
Voila.
Right.
The third most engaging and most consumed content format, let's not say content type now, format, is news, evening news. Where do people consume that?
On TV as well.
Voila. So that's kind of what informs my my hypothesis. And I mean, we are all on our phones all the time. But when we are using our phones, we don't use our phones to settle down. We don't settle down to use our phones.
No.
Right? We're constantly scrolling through things.
And we're on the go.
Constantly scrolling through things. Do you understand? We are on the go. But when we want to relax, we're probably watching TV, or we're watching something on Netflix, or you're just mindlessly scrolling through Twitter. So whatever advert that you see on Twitter or whatever advert that you see on Instagram, it will have some impact on you, but it's not. I suspect that it will not be as impactful as something that you would see while you are watching a football game, and maybe your team is winning or your team is losing, because your emotions are high.
Yeah.
Or while you are watching Big Brother,
right?
Because you're keeping for people who you don't know.
Yeah.
So that's where my hypothesis comes from.
So you have this hypothesis, and in academic research, we're told that we need to have sources. And as a journalist, you would already know how important it is to have sources. So I wanted to ask you about your process for finding a good story, whether it's at Ethical Atlantic or for Communique, when research may be a challenge and sources may be a challenge to find.
Yeah, you're right. Research is a challenge. Data is the biggest challenge that I have to face with my work. But I make up for it through conversations.
Right.
Number one, conversations. I talk to a lot of people, right? I make up for it through observation. Observation is primarily how I come up with stories for Community, and how I come up with ideas, or how we in the communications department come up with ideas for what we want to do at Eco Atlantic. Observation. So we're looking at what people are talking about.
Right.
Our ears are on the ground. We are plugged into the ecosystem. We know what people want. So when you factor all of that together, observation, conversations with people, and then thinking, you have to really be able to think in multiple layers, or think through multiple layers. So you have the first layer. So this is the idea. Then you ask yourself questions. Good. You come up with another conclusion. Then you ask yourself more questions around that conclusion. So you continue streamlining your idea until you get to a sound theory or a sound conclusion, and then you run with that conclusion and develop it into. Then I develop it into an article, or we develop it into a video, or we collaborate with some people, or this is something we put it out into the media. So that's basically how I think about ideas and stories. A lot of conversations and a lot of observation, a lot of analyzing.
Right. So eventually out of that, the idea comes, and the eventual output may not necessarily be an article, but you will decide on what is most effective when the time comes.
Yes.
That is a cool process. Data is hard. I don't know if Nielsen has anything on Nigerian, but I would say we don't have NPS scores, so we don't really know anything, which is tough.
I will drop this little hint that Communique will evolve. Communique will evolve into the Nielsen for Africa at some point. It's in the roadmap.
This is brilliant. And we will be watching and making sure that we support you the whole way.
Thank you very much.
No, for real. It's important. I just think with the way we have so few people not doing anything that is mainstream, it's very important to stick together. What kind of story would you like to tell if you had, all the research in the world, you had all the resources that you could get? What kind of story would you love to tell, and how would you tell it?
So I would love to tell stories that are heavy on data, but driven by narrative and style. Right? So let me give you a very good example. How much does Nigeria spend on, or how much do people spend on DSTV subscription in a month? One, that's data. How much does DSTV or MultiChoice spend on content acquisition, distribution, syndication in a month? That's another data set. So what does the first data set, which is how much people spend on subscription, what does it say about the subscription model? One, what does it say about the economic state of Nigeria? Two, and what does it say about the content needs of people? Then for the second data set, what does it say about how DSTV thinks about, or what does it say about what DSTV thinks of the market, or what MultiChoice thinks of the market? Right? Because what they think of the market informs informs what they spend on, what type of content they spend on, or what type of advertisers they allow on their platforms, and all of that. So those are data sets. The perfect story will be probing those data sets to ask why. So the why and the implications of those data sets, and then build out a story from there. So if I had all the resources in the world, those are the kinds of stories I would tell more often. Heavily reliant on data, but driven by narrative and style.
That is brilliant. I have to say, David, I think for the most part, there are things that you've mentioned that harken back to why. Now, why is it important for us to answer these questions, especially with the environment we are in and the impact of COVID on media spend and everything? Why do we need to know what will happen, or why do we need to know how much DSTV will spend, for example?
Okay, so DSTV is MultiChoice is one of the most influential companies in Nigeria. DSTV, MultiChoice, whichever you want to call them, is one of the most influential companies in Nigeria. They may not be the most profitable, but if DSTV sneezes, the market is going to shake. Because for a year, DSTV lost the rights to stream. This was back in 2007. I can't remember the year exactly, but back in the 2000s, DSTV lost the rights to stream the English Premier League.
I remember that
season. They lost it to High TV, and I can't begin to tell you how much shit went down in the market. A lot happened in the market. There is a reason why High TV couldn't replicate. That's a story for another day. That hopefully is something that I can tell on Communality when the time is right. But there's a reason why High TV could not sustain that. So for companies like DSTV, companies like MTN, say MTN decides today that they want to strike a deal with Netflix, that people can now stream Netflix with their MTN subscriptions for free, blah blah blah. That is a story worth telling, because these are companies that if they move a little to the right or to the left, the market will feel the effect.
And it will affect a lot of people.
It will affect a lot of people, jobs. It will affect people who use their services. Do you understand? So it's important to always keep an eye out for those types of stories, because they have massive. So that is the why. The why is that these companies have massive impact on the current state of the market, and possibly even bigger impact on the future.
Wow. I don't think anyone could have said it better than you did, because it's important. This is all really great, and there is a larger, I suppose, very, very immediate problem that we have facing us, and that's COVID. And I wanted to ask you if or how COVID has affected the work that you do, aside from looking nice and wearing masks.
I have fewer face-to-face meetings now, and people are less likely to take face-to-face meetings but because I'm digitally native, I grew my career on the internet, so it's not had any adverse effects beyond just the fact that I can't meet people face to face. I can't just have an idea and then show up at someone's office. Hey, I want to talk to you about this, because they'll probably not even be in the office. So now lots of scheduling meetings, and everybody is so busy now. The line between work and life have been blurred for so many people.
Yeah.
So people are so occupied, so it's just different now it's difficult. It's not difficult now to get anybody's attention, to get anyone to sit down with you, to talk to you for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Even I find it difficult to interface with journalists like that. If they send me requests, I just, please, can we talk over the phone for 20 minutes? Like I've had conversations with so many journalists in the past week on the phone. They sit down on the phone, or I tell them, okay, please send me an email. And then when they send an email, I'll just send them links. Okay, so please go through this link to find whatever you're looking for there. Boom, boom, boom. And that's it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm the same. I have not had a face-to-face meeting. Fun fact, I work for a B2B marketing agency, and I have never met a single person that I work with. I started the job remotely, and that is how it is till this day.
Oh, wow.
For real. Yep. Wow. Yep. And that's COVID-19, ladies and gentlemen. That is the world that we're living in. So let me ask you, what's next for Communique?
Wait, so for Communique, it's about building it now into a platform with multiple verticals. Introducing in the 2021 manifesto, I mentioned that I'll be introducing the contributors program. So it won't just be me writing for Communique. Other people will come on board, and we're going to divide Communique into verticals. So the verticals, I haven't yet decided what the verticals will be. Will it be by industry, or will it be by subject matter? I haven't figured out. I have to do more study, look at the market, gauge the market, and then try to figure out what the pathway forward. So yeah, there's also a research report in the works. When that will come out, I can't say yet, because I'm COVID. You can't predict.
Yeah.
You can't predict a lot of things right now, but lots of primary research, so that I don't have to depend on other people for research. And this research has to be funded somehow. So, I have to be thinking more about monetization, maybe not subscription yet, maybe sponsorships, partnerships, and all those things. So that's really what the future is looking like.
And what's something that you've learned from either building Communique or your whole time in the media and journalism industry?
I've learned a lot that there is always room to try new things, but it's always important to respect status quo, because, and this is something that age and experience will teach you, things are the way they are for a reason. People are not stupid. Do you understand? Things are the way they are for a reason. So if you want to change things, if you want to do something new, respect the status quo. Understand why things are the way they are. Only then can you make more informed decisions and take wiser steps. First, understand why things are the way they are. Don't just come in and say, "Ooh, I don't like the way things are. I want to change things." Why do you want to change things? How are you going to change things? Why are things the way they are? What are the obstacles? How do you remove the obstacles? So when you figure out all those things, then you can start to move. It's just better when you have all these things at the back of your mind, instead of just.
I haven't heard that angle before, but that's good. Keep an eye on what the status quo is and understand the state of play, and you'd be able to change things as they are. Exactly. That is brilliant. I want to ask you one last question, David, and this is a big one. What is something you can get with African people or African media that you can't get anywhere else?
I think one thing that I have noticed with the ecosystem is that sense of, and it's not very pronounced. You only notice it when you are in the middle of it, when you're in the middle of the industry. There is a communality to the ecosystem, and this spans across different beats, from tech to politics. You always find like journalists or media people, they band together, they move in groups, they operate in groups. And I think that's it's also a reflection of the collectivist nature of cultures around Africa versus the individualistic nature of Western culture. So that collectivist nature, that collectivism is also reflects in the media ecosystem.
Does that collectivism inform your craft as well?
Yes, it does, because there is no way I depend a lot on other people for insights. I mean, I'm very limited in what I know. So I depend a lot on other people. I have people who essentially form my editorial board. I go to them to help me refine my ideas, or if I need help finding something, or if I need help finding someone, I know who to go to. So there's just that. It comes naturally to me because of the way I've grown up.
Thank you so much, David, for coming on the Bantu podcast. I think you've shared some really powerful insights, and it's been a pleasure to have you on board. Where can people sign up to Communique?
Okay, Communique if you're on Instagram, it's at CMQ Newsletter. On Twitter, it's at CMQ Newsletter. On LinkedIn, it's CMQ Media. But the web link is davidadeleke.substack.com. davidadeleke.substack.com.
Thanks. And where can we find you and keep up with you?
I'm on social media at David Adeleke. That's my constant handle everywhere. David Adeleke.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, David. This has been a pleasure, and we're looking forward to the next time we have you on the show, possibly with the next iteration of Communique.
Thank you very much.
Our guest this week was David Adeleke. Follow him on social media to keep up with him and Communique. This episode was produced by me, Adetunji Paul. Our music this week was produced by Fizzo. Bantu, the African Creative Podcast, is a project of Studio Black. We're on Instagram at Studio BLVCK and on Twitter at Studio BLVCK_. Thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye from everywhere.